Greetings everyone. Today I want to talk about a different topic. As you can see, I've gotten a little bit into Star Wars right now, and a little bit might be an understatement. I have read a lot of wikis, books, even comics, watched a lot of fan movies, rewatched the original movies, the TV shows, everything. And while I was quite big into Star Wars when I was younger, I've slept on it for since ever Disney acquired it. And now I'm coming back because I don't think we can Disney have added and destroy such a great thing. And today I want to introduce a topic out of the Star Wars universe that I really want to um, talk about and get things off my chest. The most important thing is that we are talking about what's now considered Legends material, though I honestly think that Legends is the true material. The expanded universe was fantastic, but I'll do a video on that later. Right now what is important is the topic at hand, which is Darth Bane is an idiot. And I hope that YouTube doesn't censor everything here, but basically Darth Bane had a few ideas that I have to say were not very wise, let's say. The first idea that he got was that the Sith are weak, and that the Brotherhood of Darkness made them weaker than they already have been. And I can see where it's coming from, because the Brotherhood of Darkness avoided struggle and avoided conflict internally, which is sadly a result of how the Brotherhood of Darkness tried to solve a different issue that Bane also tried to solve. You see, Darth Bane saw that the initial order of Sith that he knew had a lot of infighting, and that the only reason why the Jedi haven't been wiped out and haven't been completely destroyed already is that every single time in galactic history when the Sith came even close to destroying the Jedi Order for good, they started infighting and killing each other and stopping themselves from eradicating the Jedi, because somehow at some point internal power struggles just become so big that the Sith would rather fight amongst each other than fighting their sworn enemy. And the Brotherhood of Darkness tried to solve that issue by making all Sith equal, so that power struggles would be removed, because when everybody has the same rank, there is no real point to killing someone to get their rank, obviously. So the Brotherhood of Darkness addressed the issue, but at the same time had the additional problem that the Sith strive on conflict, and that having to overcome and having to fight and having to survive and be better and bettering yourself is a vital part of the Sith and of the Sith code. And with the abandonment of that, the Brotherhood got a lot weaker, because now the Sith weren't fighting all the time, they weren't trying to get stronger and more powerful day by day, and so they became weaker. And that's the issue that Bane took with the Brotherhood of Darkness, and he thought his brilliant solution would be to combine these two problems together, because the rule of two kinda had massive flaws that were way worse than what we had before. As example, in the earlier Sith orders, there were many ways to advance the ladder and getting into higher positions and gaining more power. Intrigue and banding together with other weaker Sith to overthrow a stronger one and then sharing the rewards was one way to advance, though it also was one way to advance that was not very well liked, and if you got caught doing it, you would be executed on the spot, so it was a high risk thing to do. It sometimes worked out, but quite often it failed and everyone involved simply got killed. So doing it through the behind the scenes maneuvering and intriguing was really looked down at by the Sith, and they discouraged it whenever possible. That said, it was one way to advance power. Now with the rule of two, it became the only way to advance, because the only way to get any further in the rule of two is to kill your superior, to kill your master. So what Bane deemed a problem the Sith had, the constant infighting, now was the only option to move forward. Like literally the only way to advance is now to fight amongst each other. Brilliant solution, Darth Bane. The second problem is that, as said, the Brotherhood of Darkness became weakened by the fact that it didn't fight amongst each other as much as they used to, and thus there was not as much of a pressure and need to improve. Now with the rule of two, the main issue is that they had to go into hiding, otherwise the Jedi would have absolutely annihilated them. So they went into hiding. Now what do you not do when you're hiding from your enemy? You're not fighting your enemy. And that means that the Sith again removed the pressure, the need to improve from the system, and the result was that the Sith became weaker and weaker and weaker as time went by, because they now did not have to fight. They did not have to improve their force abilities, they did not have to become better at lightsaber combat, and most importantly, they now completely lacked any combat experience because they didn't fight. They want to stay hidden, and fighting is a bad way to stay hidden, which means that again the Sith just became a lot weaker. So Bane's two ideas to make the Brotherhood, to make the Sith stronger, failed by his own rule, and the infighting was worse than ever because of his own rule. What's even more fun is that he introduced new problems that the Sith didn't have before. As example, if you have only two Sith at any one time, the main issue becomes that if one of them is a nut job or failure or pretty bad at what they're doing, you have the problem that you have a 50-50 chance of someone messing it up for everyone forever, which we see what happened with Darth Gravit. Darth Gravit or Gravit or whatever, however you pronounce that, he decided that the Sith knowledge was kinda stupid and only for him to have, and thus he started destroying Sith holocrons and other knowledge that the Rule of Two era Sith had gathered over many generations. And with that, the Sith lost a lot of knowledge, not all of it because Gravit was stopped in time, but they lost a lot of knowledge about Sith alchemy, Sith sorcery, and basically ancient Sith rituals and techniques, which meant that the Sith were again severely weakened by their very own, as it happened before. But this time the loss of knowledge was pretty much permanent, and some of that was never recovered, which meant that Bane now somehow managed to reduce the Sith in power even more. What's even worse is that again you have two Sith. Imagine that there is a spaceship accident when both of them are on board, which could happen anytime. Then the Sith would have been wiped out by chance. What if they had a plague or something, or caught something? What about they would be found by someone and annihilated? Now there's no more Sith at all forever because you just wiped out the last two remaining of them. Stupid tactic, absolutely stupid tactic. The Sith are a religion and they kinda need to be more than two to function properly. What's even more hilarious to me is that the Sith, under Darth Bane's rule of two, kinda abandoned everything that made the Sith, because the Sith code, if you read about it, is all about freedom. It's really all about having the power to do whatever you please. If you read the Sith code, you will see that passion is just a way to gain strength. Strength is just a way to gain power. Power is only there to achieve victory. Why win? Because victory will set you free. And freedom is the ultimate goal that Sith have. Now, in the rule of two, how much freedom do you have if you have to hide who you are at every moment of your life? I'd say that's pretty much a self-made cage right there. How can you be free if you can't even be yourself? How can you be free if you can't even say who you are and what you are? How can you be truly free if you have to cower in front of a master? And how can you truly be free if you can't even use your powers openly? You can't even be yourself out in public. You simply have to hide and suppress who you are. Is that freedom, or is that not a lot of additional chains that you're putting on yourself? And with the rule of two era Sith, that was a mandatory. Like you couldn't be who you truly are, because then you would just be killed by the Jedi like that. And that's why they had to hide who they are, which means that the rule of two era Sith are the least free Sith of any time or era. So congratulations on abandoning the main absolute rule that the Sith always had, which was personal freedom. That is the very reason people become Sith, because achieving freedom is the ultimate goal. And Bane just threw that out of the window. And even more hilariously is that Bane somehow thought that the Sith rule of two would make them stronger with each and every generation and enable them to finally wipe out the Jedi for good. Now, the Jedi already had been wiped out almost completely several times in history when there were many Sith around. So the Sith already did pretty good there. There was no real need to improve that any further. But he tried to, and so 1000 years pass, and 1000 years later Palpatine achieved what several Sith orders have already achieved before, which is driving the Jedi to near extinction. But once again, that has been achieved before. Palpatine didn't achieve much that previous Sith didn't already achieve. So after 1000 years of rule of two, where the Sith were basically absolutely meaningless and didn't have any power whatsoever, we get back to where they have been before. Fantastic. And with Palpatine we see another problem. Again, one nut job is enough to end it for everyone, because Palpatine established the rule of one and said he has to be the only Sith around, and he kept Vader really small. And the idea Bane had was that every time a master becomes a master by killing their master, they would be stronger than the one before. And the idea Bane had was that at some point the apprentice would challenge the master to a duel, and the stronger one would win, and if the apprentice loses, the master just takes on another apprentice. The idea was open, honorable, fair combat to ensure that the stronger one continues the line. Now, Sith being Sith, many of them didn't do it fair and square, and Palpatine murdered his master while his master, Darth Plagueis, was asleep and drunk. So Palpatine didn't beat his master fair and square, and he definitely was not the stronger one by the metrics that Bane wanted to have. So congrats again, because one nut job was enough to end it for everyone, which is the problem when you have only 2 points of failure in your system. One of them is very likely to fail, and if that happens, everything collapses, which happened with Palpatine. So congratulations, Bane, on that one. Also, the very fact that the Sith had to hide meant that they now had to rely on manipulation and intrigue to get anywhere in the galaxy, which is again the exact opposite of what the Sith actually teach, because the Sith teachings are all about being stronger and becoming more powerful, and the need to evolve and get better at what you do. Now, that meant physical combat for most physical combat and force abilities and force powers for most occasions, which, if you have to beat your opponents fair and square, means that the stronger one continues on. Meanwhile, if you make intrigue and manipulation the main focus, being fair and square about anything is not the idea, and beating the Jedi into the ground won't happen if you don't train for it and don't have any combat experience. So not a good way to go. Finally, the last big blunder Bane made was the very idea he had about the Force. Because according to Darth Bane, the Force is a poison. And the more people the Force, or the dark side at least, he said the dark side is a poison, the more people you spread the dark side powers to, the weaker the Force becomes with each and every single one of them. His idea was to kill every dark side user so that the remaining dark side users would become super powerful in the Force. That was his general idea of how things are supposed to go. And honestly, he didn't factor in anything. Like, if you look at his idea of pouring all of the poison that the Sith were back into one cup to make it more potent, and killing off the Brotherhood of Darkness so they won't dilute the Force any further, his main issue with that is that the Sith are not the only dark side users in the galaxy. There is dozens of dark side orders that use the dark side. There are the Sorcerers of Thunder, for example. There's various grey orders that use the dark side. There's a metric F-ton of dark side users exclusively from dark Jedi, who are more individuals, to entire orders like, say, the Witches of Dathomir, the Night Sisters. There is many Force users that use the dark side that are not Sith. So by wiping out the Sith, he really just managed to make the non-Sith more powerful in his own mind. And how exactly does that make the Sith more powerful? Because there's no guarantee that the potence increase of the dark side venom in his idea would benefit the Sith. What if he just made everyone else stronger and just weakened the Sith, and now the Sith can't fight opposing Darksiders and might be snuffed out by those? Yeah, not a bright idea. More importantly, his very idea is already flawed if you look at galactic history. The strongest dark side Force users in galactic history were the Rakata. And the Rakata were a huge galaxies-wide spanning empire with millions and millions, like there were more Force sensitive dark side using Rakata than Sith. I don't know the exact numbers, but I would bet there was 1,000 times more dark side using Rakata than Sith in galactic history. And the Rakata were much more powerful with the Force than the Sith ever were. So obviously his hypothesis is already proven wrong just by that. If you look at history, the ancient Sith, the original Sith, the Sith Lords, not the Sith race, were so much more powerful than anything that came later. Naga Sadow and Marco Ragnos and the like, they had Force powers that later generations couldn't even imagine. Like Palpatine needed a Death Star to blow up a single planet. Yeah, earlier Sith did that with just the Force, and one of them even blew up an entire star system, not just one planet, just using the Force. We have Darth Nihilus and Darth Vitiate eating the entire life force of entire planets from orbit. So they did what Palpatine did with his huge war machinery all by themselves and with the Force. Makes Palpatine look rather weak. If you look at what you can achieve with Sith sorcery and Sith alchemy, knowledge that was completely lost on the Rule of Two era Sith, that was just so much more powerful than the Force abilities than we see. And even with Force abilities, earlier Sith were more powerful. So really all we can see is that the Sith got weaker and weaker and weaker as time progresses. And Darth Bane didn't see that might have to do with the Sith becoming fewer and fewer in numbers, because according to his own idea, the Sith would have had to become stronger and stronger as their numbers dwindled, which obviously was not the case. The exact opposite happened. So it turns out that the Sith are a fire after, that the Force, the dark side, is a fire after all, and passing it on makes it stronger. So his very base for everything was already proven wrong, and he failed to see that. Now I'm not sure if I can blame him, because he grew up as a very abused child on a mining planet as basically a wage slave, and he didn't really get much of an education, and he joined the troops and then became a Sith Lord much later in his life. So I'm not sure how much knowledge he had of everything, though he did get his hands on quite a few holocrons, and he definitely had access to the history of the galaxy to some degree. In special, as Revan brought up a lot of that before, and Bane even based his entire Rule of Two idea on Revan, which is the last point that I'm going to make here, because Revan's Rule of Two was the blueprint for Bane's Rule of Two. Problem is that Bane completely missed the mark on what Revan meant with the Rule of Two, because for Revan, Rule of Two meant that there was one Sith out in the open as a charismatic leader that everyone looked up to and was the big bright target for the opponents. A figurehead that was presented to the public as the one and only ruler, which Bane interpreted to be the master, which could be or could not be. Actually, I think it would be smarter to not have the master out in the open like that, but that the one ruler would be out in the open, and the second ruler, the Rule of Two, would be the shadow hand that would rule and reign from behind the scenes, from behind the curtains, that would pull the strings and actually run things and do all the governing and kill everyone that opposes the emperor or whatever the figurehead was called, so that the two would work together on ruling over the galaxy and the rest of the Sith. There was never the idea that there's only two Sith. The idea was that there should be two Sith ruling and not just one. He got this idea with Emperor Vitiate, because obviously Vitiate kinda abandoned the Sith during his rule and left it to the Sith Council, and the Council was a bit corrupt, and so the idea Revan had was that they needed a guiding hand, basically. And one emperor out in the open and one behind the scenes, making sure that the council and other governing bodies do their job right, was actually something Vitiate kinda did when he declared the player character of the Sith warrior to be the Wrath of the Emperor. That was kinda the idea, to kill opponents before they become a problem. And the Rule of Two was really meant that there were two rulers at any given time and a lot of subjects to rule over and support them, which again Bane completely missed and just made one of the dumbest decisions in history, which ultimately led to the downfall of the Sith as a whole and their empire. And I can't fathom how Bane is seen as the Sithari, because yeah, he destroyed the Sith, but he destroyed them for good. He didn't really rebuild them. He just made them into laughingstock, more or less. The only reason that the Sith in later eras, like the Clone Wars era, were comparatively powerful to the Jedi, is that the Jedi also had 1,000 years period of peace where they didn't really train for combat and went back to meditating, which meant that when the Jedi were finally forced to fight, they were kind of weak and degenerated themselves. If you compare the Old Republic era Jedi and what combat feats they had, just watch, say, the trailers for Star Wars The Old Republic, just watch that. The Jedi used to be so much stronger in combat because they had opponents that were strong in combat. And I know, in lore it says that the Rule of Two era Sith were more powerful than anything that came before them, because that was the 1970s original blueprint that George Lucas had, and somehow that stuck with fans to this very day. That somehow, just because it says that the Rule of Two era Sith were stronger, that must mean that everyone before had to be weaker, right? That's the lore statement of the official sources. But that is not what we actually see depicted in media. If you look at video games, if you look at comics, if you look at books, the Sith of old did things that were absolutely unachievable by even Palpatine or Vader, and obviously the earlier Sith were a lot stronger. If you can trust Traya in any regard on this, which, by the way, she might be the most knowledge person on the Force and its ways in entire history of Star Wars. She said that Darth Sion, the guy that was too stubborn to die and just willed himself back to life again and again and again, he was literally immortal. That Darth Nihilus, who ate planets from orbit, that Vitiate, who was this insanely powerful star system exploding guy, that these people were just children playing with power compared to the ancient Sith, like Tula Kord. So, yeah, Palpatine is nowhere near that level of power. So, obviously, what we see contradicts what was said. The problem here is that, again, in the 70s, this was just a blueprint. Lucas didn't plan on making this huge universe. He wanted to do 3 movies originally and be done with it. That was his idea. He couldn't predict that it would be such a huge excess that would lock him in for decades to come, which sometimes I think he might be a bit bitter about, because Star Wars is the thing he's known for, and not many of his other projects like Indiana Jones that didn't do anywhere as well. That said, though, again, it was said in the 70s that the rule of 2 Sith were stronger than anything that came before, but later statements kinda contradict that, and George also evolved his position on how the Force works, but that's a different video. For now, I think it's enough to say that when we look at what's depicted in games, in comics and stuff like that, that indeed the older Sith were much more powerful than Vader or Sidious. That's simply what we see. And that's how I treat it, which means that Bane was again ultimately completely wrong, and his idea of how the Sith should work failed hard. With that, have a nice day, and may the Force be with you.